And welcome back, everyone. This makes the third episode of the series. We'll see how many we end up going. Um, so I figured since there are a few people joining that haven't watched the series to date so far, we would start this one out with a quick little recap of everything that we're trying to achieve here in a very summary sort of way, and that'll give folks time to join the stream. Just as a reminder, what we're doing is we're building a little incremental game using Business Central's functionality in the engine. So it's all about learning the AL coding involved in modifying Business Central. And through that process, we're going to learn a lot about how Business Central functions as a system. For the most part, the players will be hiring and firing, setting virtual employees, and managing vendors and customers via bots, which will generate all of the transactions. Players will not have access to enter information into the system themselves. They're just the manager. Each player will be running a company for a season, a competitive season, to see who can generate the highest wealth. So that's the view in a nutshell. Today's primary goal is that we are going to create the infrastructure necessary to have instances of bots exist. We will also take a brief stop by what we have worked on yesterday, which is the system settings functionality. There are a couple of bugs in there that that happens. We obviously don't have any testing code in place, and we may go ahead and get to developing some of the role center functionality for the player. We're going to end up in the end with two main role centers, but we need a lot of infrastructure to be able to build on top of that first. So let's talk about what's gone on between episodes. For the most part, I will not do code between episodes unless it is massively changing things around. So, as we talked about yesterday, instead of having an automatic routine push information out as part of this code unit to the other companies, we'll go ahead and run a routine on demand to do that, to synchronize things. And as part of that project yesterday, we created this little setup overview that shows us some of the master data that we're configuring for the companies. You can see here now we've got some data set up in our master data company. There's a couple little bugs. We created a function to note whether something was a master company, and just a straight up typing issue, payment terms isn't calculating correctly due to a typo. So on the bright side, that jumps out nice and easy. So we'll swing down, fix that real quick. And that is on our Role Center BCS setup overview. So that is this page right here. We created a function to flag a Boolean whether or not a company is a master company, but did not call that. So should have probably been a little more obvious. One of the nice things about the Visual Studio Code environment is when you create procedures, you can see if it's being called by something else. Until I put this code in, you can see 0 references. So you can know, yep, you wrote a great procedure, but great code doesn't help unless something calls it. And the other issue here was that just while I was chattering along and letting things autocomplete, payment terms was pointing to payment method. So, easy fix there. Okay. When we were going over creating the role center for the system manager, we also manually created a profile in the system, in the configuration table, and correctly pointed out in chat was that AL code, honestly, forgot it even it was a thing. You can create a profile object that registers these role centers. So at some point when we're tidying up some of our role centers, we'll come back and create the relevant profile. And that'll be nice because then we can also focus on some of the customization options that are available to us in this profile level. We also will be spending more time kind of talking through how the role center lays out. There's really good documentation on what parts are what. And hopefully we'll be able to create a useful info-rich environment for both our system administrator and our players. So that takes care of one of the secondary goals real quick. We had also started to put together our bot templates. This is my first time working around with the enums, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out through the series. I don't envision we'll be doing any extending of that, but maybe someone will, maybe sometime down the road we'll do new versions of things that add some optional extensions that people could choose to incorporate into their solution. We'll see. But the general idea here is that we're going to have templates for the different types of bots. We're going to go ahead and configure those with all of their base price and power consumption, their operations per day, and that'll give the starting point for when a player purchases a sales bot. What does that actually make? However, we as a player can certainly have more than one sales bot, so we need to create a new table that will be our landing space for which bots do we have. So that's going to be our next stop for today. Okay, and as we discovered last time, there are some really great tools in here for AL file wizards, so let's check out one. Let's say we're going to do this new table wizard. We'll see if that works. I believe this is, yep. So an example of a place where we'd have to know our next available object ID versus the IntelliSense autocomplete. But we'll go ahead and call this BCS bot instance. I don't know if this is going to give us anything else interesting. I've had a couple of issues with this otherwise delightful extension, so we'll see if we're going to get anything out of it. Seems like no. Okay, we'll move on. And I'll troubleshoot that before our next time around, because I'm sure that's my environment, not the extension. And we'll go ahead and create this with a nice layout here. And none of this is really going to be for GDPR. We're not going to be dealing with real world data. So for almost every time, I'm going to go ahead and flag it as system metadata, just so that way we don't have to worry about it. Okay, now for the bots, players could have a dozen of these, they could have a million of these. I have no idea. It's going to be an interesting thing to see how people play this when we do this. The alpha testers are going to have a lot of fun with that, so we'll see. As a result of that, my thinking and strategy on this is that the instance will just go ahead and do an incrementing PK integer for these, because every player is its own company, so that should support probably more bots instances than the server will be able to handle anyways. So we'll go ahead and call this just, well, nice and easy, instance ID, and we're going to auto increment that. I don't have any strong feelings if we skip any numbers, so if somehow a bot is sold off and there's a gap in the series, that's fine by us. Okay. Now we'll go ahead and we're going to copy a couple of things over from the bot template. For example, we definitely want the bot type. We'll borrow that over here. We're going to use that in some of the role center flow field calculations. We're going to use that in list-driven things, and obviously lots in code. Now, we can also go ahead and steal some of these fields over. We're not going to bring over them as the exact same name, base price, but we'll go ahead and for our keeping track of things, we'll keep track on each bot instance what price the player paid. This will be relevant for calculating wealth, for example. And then we'll have our power per day. When we populate these instances, we'll populate that from the template, but as players research different upgrades, these will change. So that'll be fun. Okay. And in my experience, I think what we'll do is for the player-facing side, we'll go ahead and let players have, first of all, let's do a designation. And that way we can kind of use that as our code type field. Code 20, sure, why not? We'll have fun with that. We'll do Star Wars style, like TX007 or something. Why not? And if players are strange, because players are strange, we'll let them edit the bot name, which will initially populate with whatever we populate the designation, but let players change that. Okay, so there's some of the basic information we'll need on this bot instance. Let's think about this a little bit. We are bringing over some of the per day pieces of information from the template, but we're also potentially going to have upgrades. I'm undecided from a game balance decision how we should handle some of the upgrades. For example, we could have a subsidiary table where we do cumulative upgrades. We could have bots only have specific slots for different types of upgrades. And I'm thinking leaning towards the latter. I think it'll be a little less complex to troubleshoot game balance over multiple seasons if we have just a power and operations upgrade and that one slot drives things. And that'll give a good reason for research towards really making sure you're giving the best solution inside of each bot. Now, the other thing that I'm not so sure about is bots are going to be assigned to different things. So we have the order processing bots, we have the purchaser bots, for example. Those are going to be connected to customers and vendors. We're going to have logistics bots, assembly and manufacturing bots, and those are going to be assigned to specific locations. So in that case, all of those things are code 20 primary keys. So we could potentially have a complex table relation here where that assignment code is based off of what bot type it is. I'm not sure if that's beneficial over having just a separate, customer code, vendor code, all those separate fields. But honestly, I've never tried to program a table relation against an extendable enum, so I'm kind of curious if it'll work, and we can always come back off of that dead end if it does not. So let's try it. So we've talked about we're going to add. I like to leave number gaps. Some people have different philosophies on this. I like to leave gaps between fields because, what if we come back sometime and later down the road we decide that maybe there's a power per day multiplier that, say, for example, a solar flare makes everything run still but cost more power. We could come back and add a 61 field that is a multiplier on top of that. So I like to leave a little room. When it comes to table field numbers, we have a lot to work with, so why not? Let's see here, we were going to do power upgrade code. And I'm going to do that based on a code 20. We'll have an upgrade master table where we uniquely identify the upgrades. And operations Great. Okay, great. And we'll bring on down our data classifications and our captions. If you are brand new to BC development, you might be wondering, I'm making these captions the exact same as the field name. What's the point? That's entirely fair. Probably early next week, I'm going to turn on the translation functionality, and you'll see what actually results of that. And I think right before I turn that on, I will set some of these fields to not have captions to show the difference. Speaking of which, I missed one, so let's get that in here. There we go. Okay, great. All right. Perfect. And that's all good. So now let's see if we can figure out the complex assignment code. I don't know how this will work. Let's see. As a rule, get used to, I don't know. I can try, but I don't know. The technology, even before Microsoft bought it, was always improving, and it has improved even faster and faster and faster. So there is never a scenario where you will know that what you're going to try to do will work. It most likely will, it probably will, it almost certainly will, but never absolutely will, because they may change things. So become comfortable with not knowing. It just happens. Okay, so we're going to try a crazy little if. Let's see, if our bot type equals, and I don't actually know when we do a filter on bot type, since this is an enum. Let's see if we use the value or the... It might be even as crazy as bot type, no? Okay. Let's see what happens. I don't know about you, but I'm still not used to programmatically doing this table syntax. For those of you who've been doing this a long time, I'm so used to the GUI helping me out with this a little bit that it's weird to write them out by hand. And I admit I've, for a long time, been letting myself use the crutch of going back into the classic development environment, building them there, and pasting them here, hoping that it would all work. So, let's see. Okay, cool. So we're going to do an if statement, and I'm looking at the tooltip and just checking out how we do the if conditionals and checking to make sure our parentheses are in the right place, which looks like we are. So, okay, if our conditions and then table name dot field name where table filters. Okie dokie. So, if it is a sales type, we want to relate to the customer number. So we can't equal text. Let's see. I wonder, because we were using const in the table relation, it was immediately treating it as a literal. That's saying the bot type has to literally equal the string sales. And I bet you when we use filter, it evaluates both sides of the function situation here and can evaluate that we're going to equal sales. We can test that. That won't be too hard to test out. And then we'll go ahead and house our syntax for else's. Beautiful. Okay. So theoretically, we should be able to do something like this. I'm already suspicious that this isn't quite going to do the way we would expect it to. We'll see. And is it purchase or purchasing? Purchasing. One of the challenges I have with writing up these sort of strings is it's also the autocomplete doesn't really like these a whole lot. I don't know if my folks in chat know if we can line wrap in a useful way to not have a jumbo string. This, good question, chat. This is 16. Okay, cool. So we are doing an if-else and complain. Field name, table relation. What a peculiar syntax this is. Okay. A good suggestion in the tips. Let's see if we can get our AL Explorer to cooperate. This object designer here is an extension in Waldo's extension pack, and it's pretty darn handy, but I admit I've had some issues where it didn't really want to open up, so we're going to temporarily comment that out just in case that's causing any of my troubles. So this is pretty cool. When you fire it open, it downloads a cache of all the objects and lets you see and search through events and objects. So that's super handy. Let's go take a look. Chat suggested let's take a look at sales line and look at our number field, because this guy has table relations. Boy, does it. Unfortunately, it looks like this .al file does not display those. Here we are. Helps to scroll the rest of the way down. So, interesting. Okay, so in this particular case, it's more straightforward. We're doing if-elses, and we're doing those against the tables without specifying the field name. So let's see what we can do to copy that. Okay. Part of this is that I don't know if it works the way I'm trying to do it against an enum. So that might be part of the issue too. Okay. If bot type is customer, seems to imply we should be able just to go ahead and do a comma. May not be true. We'll see. Interesting. Yeah. Folks hanging out in the chat pointing out good things. The sales line type is an enum now, and with that being the case, they're still able to go ahead and do the type equal const against that. So we should, in theory, be able to do our const against sales. So let's see if it's just a case of double single quotes. It is. How beautiful is that? So let's scooch this over a little bit and get the files out of the way so we can see a little bit of what we're doing. Okay, if bot type equals const of so why we are having some interesting issues with okay, so the commas are for different case situations, and simple enough. My eyes are just glossing over it. Else if, and if here. Good news. That means that we should be able to, as soon as we open quote, see all of our enum values. How cool is that? Fantastic. Okie dokie. Well, I don't know about anyone else, but I've learned something today, so that's cool. The other bot types that we are going to have assignments for, we've got sales const. We also are going to do inventory basic. This is going to go against location. I could probably do a complex if filter that handled both situations for the inventory advanced basic, but I'm just going to make this nice and easy in case we need to change one of those later, which we will, actually. Part of this is that a little later on we're going to add some where filtering onto the end of these to ensure that these locations are those flagged basic versus advanced based on whether you're using warehousing or not. So that makes perfect sense. And there was a couple other bot types. Let's go back to our list here. Assembly manufacturing. I'm not sure what we would assign the bot to for assembly, so we're going to skip that for now, but manufacturing will definitely be against a particular work center. Okay. And for all of these tables, our primary key, nice and easy, is a code 20, so we're all in good shape there. Okay. Alrighty. Fantastic. So there we go. Neat. I haven't actually built an enum and done some complex filtering on it before, so that'll be delightful to have that just all work. We don't have to handle any custom dropdowns. For those of you who are new to BC development, the advantage to doing this advanced table relationship is a couple of different things. If a vendor, customer, location, work center, if any of those are renamed, it will cascade and update the values inside of this table to reflect that change. It will also make sure that when the user is entering the data, if they key something in that is invalid, by default it does validate table relationship. We could go ahead and explicitly say true, but I believe by defining it, it is already true, and we can override it to say false. And last but not least, it automatically and magically does the delightful little drop downs for us based on customer, vendor, location, and work center settings. So that's good stuff. Excellent. Interesting. Okay. As soon as I hit save, it auto-applied its own formatting rules to it. So that kind of crazy looking else, then new line, then if is the appropriate rules on how to format that. Now I know. When we moved from the classic environment to the AL world, there are a handful of coding habits I completely had to change because I thought I had been following the standard for 20 years, and having this auto magically reformat things on me taught me I was a little bit off. So it's pretty useful. If you don't want to have to learn to exactly format things correctly, the save will cover you a little bit. So that's useful. Okay, great. Now we need, at the very least, we should have a basic bot instance list so the player can see all of the bots that they have. So we're going to close that up to make some room here. And now we should have a little better luck with our AL file wizard here. Let's see, I know we're going to be creating a new page, and we already have 80,001, so 88,002 should be our next one. Let's see if we need to do that. Yep. Good. Auto-filled that in for us. Beautiful. In this case, I'm going to do a list. Unlike the list part that we did for the role center, this will be a full actual list. So we'll just call this straight up bot list, even though it's a list of the bot instances. Actually, yeah, let's go ahead and be consistent in our naming. We'll give it the caption of just bot list, but that's fine. Bcs bot instance. And this is going to go into list. Great. Perfect. Okay, so instance ID is going to be our first column, though we'll mark it to be hidden. We'll go ahead and do bot type as our next one. And then we'll go ahead and do designation followed by bot name. And I think what we'll do is we'll do power per day, operation per day, and then we'll go ahead and add the rest of these as ones they can choose to show, but we won't show by default. For the most part, I'm going to provide a lot more fields that people can choose to show than I might normally, since the only people I imagine who will be playing this are professionals who work with this product and are trying to either learn more about it or already know lots about it. So for the most part, I'll let people choose to show lots of things if they want. So we'll come on down here and mark those as invisible for now. We just want to have a nice list of all the bots. And our caption in this case is bot list. And our additional search terms will once again include bots. Okay. And somewhere along the lines, one of my saves produced a giant gobbledygook message that I need to look into and go, how did I manage to create this crash scenario? And that way we could submit it to the Microsoft team of how to not have this crash happen. We're not going to try to solve that right now in the live stream here. That's fine. Okay, so that's pretty good. We now have a list, at least, of some of the basic things. Great. So, we've got that. So my inclination as our next step is to start building the player role center, so that way we can see what sort of information about these bot instances do we want to put together. And when we're thinking about the role center, there's a few different pieces. What are we going to show that is the most relevant info? Towards the end of the series, we'll put together some things around headline, because I think there's going to be great data that we could give to that. The section here, which is the wide Q groups, that's going to be great information to show some of our player summary data, like for example the average revenue per day, expenses per day, maybe their standings, total wealth, that sort of thing. And then I think when we get into these Q stacks, we are going to have to be a little careful and thoughtful about what do we want to show. But for sure, I definitely want to display a total number of bots running. So we can look to creating that as one of our starting points for the player role center. And I think I'll take the advice that we got in chat yesterday of go ahead and make sure to create a profile object on that for that. So let's do that. To make what we're going to make here, we are going to want to have a profile object, a role center page. We're going to need an activities, which is a card part with specifically a Q group. And to make that work, we're also going to need an underlying player Q table object. So we're going to make a handful of objects. Hopefully that'll take us just about the next half hour or so. Nothing new for a lot of the folks involved on this, if you're familiar with making role centers, so hopefully it's nothing earth-shattering for you. Let's see here. So in our case now, we're thinking about role center life. So let's go ahead and make them in here. Believe it or not, I'm going to work my way backwards through that list a little bit. We're going to make the table object for the queues first, so that way we can build the activities, then we can put the activities on the role center, and finally we can point the profile at the role center. So let's get our player queue first. I don't think there's any snippets for queue tables, which that's fine. There doesn't need to be. I'm not being particularly focused or fastidious on the order of which I put object numbers and things, because of how little they're really used in the coding development in this case. We're not trying to license objects. We're not worrying about extensibility, future versions, and things like that. I'm mostly more worried about naming and maybe a little organizational structure. So it's not a big deal to me that we're hopping between different object numbers in different parts of our solution. I don't think that's a big deal for this. For some of the ISVs who are developing solutions that they're going to want to put into AppSource, you need a license for customers, any of those sort of scenarios, object numbering can be a much bigger deal. So something to be aware of. I'm being lazy about it. You probably should not be. Okay, so this is again, we're going to system metadata the heck out of this little table. Okay. Now for queue tables, if we're copying the standard flow of how these sort of things work, I believe they usually have just a code field called primary key, and there's usually only one record and they're blank, if I recall the design pattern on that. And then the rest of it is typically full of flow fields. So let's get a field total bot count. If you are brand new to AL or BC development, flow field, what the heck is that? I'll show you. All fields in the system have a class. By default, they are normal, so you don't normally need to specify it. Normal means it just holds data. It is a bucket like any other field in any other database, but flow field is real-time calculated, and it is what is referred to as lazy calculated, generally speaking, although the system lets you do some things to make that a little easier. What this means is that we have to provide it with a calculation formula that when this field shows up places, or we explicitly tell it to be calculated, it will go ahead and use this logic. So we are going to do a count of all of our bot instances, and we could do where clauses here if we wanted to in this calc formula. As you can see, we've got a few different possible ways to calculate things. Count is very popular. So for example, a activities panel might have a count of open sales orders. We might want to see a sum of customer balances. That one's a little more complex. We might want to see the earliest date a product is going to become available. A minimum on a date gets the earliest date. So there's some different ways that we'll use this pretty heavily going forward. Here we're going to keep it nice and simple. This bot instance table only contains bots. If we sell a bot, it will leave that table. So the player's bot count is always just the count of that. Nice and simple. And I typically, for these, will go ahead and set these to be editable false manually, just to be very, very clear. These should not be edited. There are some scenarios where flow fields can be editable, and if players edit things, it produces changes to the table underneath. We will most likely also set the activities page to non-editable, and it's all going onto a role center, which by default is non-editable, but I like to be real explicit everywhere. Okay, fantastic. So very, very little starting point for this one, but gotta start somewhere. Okay. And once again, I'm slowly getting used to which snippets do we have. I don't think we have an activities. We do. Thanks, Waldo. Okay. Beautiful. So, Bcs Player Activities. Now, we could potentially have multiple different activities areas. So for example, when we're looking at this example, there might be on the left-hand side here, these could be 3 queue stacks about sales, and the right-hand side could be 3 about purchasing, which could be coming from 2 different queue tables. So these are 2 potentially different activities pages. I don't envision needing to have a lot of different panels of these with what we're trying to achieve, so I'm keeping it nice and simple and having just a basic player's activities. Since this is going to contain a lot of bot information, we could and may at some point in the future break it out into financial activities versus bot activities. So we'll see. We may end up coming back to refactor that. May not. Okay. Alrighty. Some things to be aware of. We're definitely doing a layout because it is a card part as our page type. Waldo's snippet, nice and easy, also gives us a really good thing we should always have for our activities panel. Refresh on activate. This means if you Alt-Tab and Alt-Tab back in, then it will hit refresh kind of for you automatically. Good stuff. And then what table we're pulling from. The key thing here to our layout is that this is a queue group rather than a group like we would see in a lot of other places. There's a interesting slight misspelling in the snippet. That's okay. This giving us an example of 2 groups inside of a layout, and each of the fields that show up inside of a group are going to be different types. Different stacks rather. So here, what Waldo's given us in this snippet is a highlighted activity that is of the group layout type wide, followed by normal activities that are just individual stacks. So he's given us an example that has one of these sections here and then some of these below. We're not quite ready to do a queue group layout wide yet, so we'll go ahead and remove that. Okay, let's see. So we'll create a queue group for bots for now, and total bot count. Great. And then we need to give a drill down page ID, which on the bright side, we just made that BCS bot instant list. There we go. Once upon a time, some scenarios you had to put in IDs, the actual page numbers. They really nicely made that simpler. We don't generally have to do that these days, so that's helpful. Sure, we'll give some sort of tooltip there. We do not need a second stack at the moment. And one of the things that you do need to have on, Okay, great. The snippet does this automatically for us, which is great. The player queue table we created in the background here, when the player first loads the role center up, there is no record. That table is empty. It is completely empty, which means there's nothing there to even load or calculate. As a result, for activities, you always do an on-open page where you try to get and if you cannot, then create a record and insert it. And this is the reason that we did a primary key of code. By doing get with blank, that just means a single record probably is in that table with a primary key of nothing. So that's good. And then just as an example, in the snippet he includes on after get record. If you had to do some manual calculations or math to derive your field values, then you would do a little procedure to do that math. We are not. So for now, we will go ahead and get rid of that. We could also just remove the code here and leave that in place for the future in case we want to. I think I will. Because why not? Great. Okay, so now we have our basic activities, and we're going to move up our stack here to make a role center for that, which is going to be awfully similar to our system manager role center. So let's make a new page. Player. And we don't need a source table for role centers. Great. Finish. Okay, this gives us a very empty little role center to work with, which is fine. I don't believe we do a source for that, so that's cool. Okay, so in the role center, we can also, for example, pop open the code example just to take a look how it looks. They break down some of the different parts here that you could have, how you're going to lay out, the embedding section versus the processing section. These are all driven based on the different navigation areas, and I will suggest that folks take a look through kind of for me, at least on a larger screen than I'm currently streaming, I found it a lot easier to go ahead and open this image up in a new tab and kind of look at that side by side to look at what areas are they covering as far as what we're going to add to things. Okie doke. Yeah, so let's see. We're going to be mostly working with 6 at the moment for the players. This is just creating the data queues that we're going to be working off of. So that is where we're going to start. And for the moment, we won't have much by way of navigation menus, bar, or action bar. So that's fine. And let's see how helpful our autocomplete will be for us. Because we have definitely different groups and parts. I don't think we want groups, so let's go take a look at one of our existing role centers real quick, just because I think there's a lot we can learn from that. Does by any chance nice and easy work? Cool. Okay, so if we look at, say, for example, our finance manager, we can see that there is the actions section, which we can go ahead and collapse some of these, maybe? Not quite collapsing to the degree I would like it to. But apparently that's because of how we're actually seeing some of the data in here. That's unfortunate. I think this is mainly just showing us the actions in the source object. It is. Unfortunate. Wonder why that is. Okay, that's fine. So here we have some of the layouts of a standard sales order processor, your basic default role that everyone often has as their default in Business Central. We can see that we create a layout, an area of role center, and then we have some of the different pieces and parts. So, interesting. I would have assumed that they did some more designation of what parts relate to which pieces, but perhaps we're auto-landing on things. So let's go back to our role center. Yeah, we're just going to add the part then, which will be our Bcs Player Activities. Okay. Okie dokie. And as I said before, I'm getting lots of save issues, so I need to track down what exactly is not compiling nice on that. That's fine. And now we're going to, last but not least, create the player profile object, which I haven't done in AL, but seems straightforward enough. We're mainly looking to say, okay, you need to specify what the profile is, what its description is, which role center should we point at, and what should the caption be. We're not going to do any of the customization to the layouts just yet, so that's fine. So this is relatively easy and gentle. Profile. Okay, we're just going to call it player. This is the profile for the player. Thanks. And yay, BCS Player Role Center. Beautiful. And we do not need those captions. And I'm presuming this caption will be what is actually going to be shown in our list. I find it interesting that we don't need to give any sort of ID to this whatsoever, but that's fine. Okay, well, let's publish this. One of the other things that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to test out that profile, so we'll go ahead and do that too. So, over here in our Business Manager, we are going to go into My Settings, and here's our player. So I had manually, in the last episode, created the System Manager role. I think it would be worthwhile for us to go ahead and update that object to a profile as well. So let's pop out for a second and go to our Profiles roles and delete the one we manually created and add that as a profile object. That way we're not relying on an older method. So let's go ahead and, oops, I accidentally just said to use that as a default profile, so that's fun. Yep. Yeah, that's what I thought. By setting it default, I cannot delete it. So let's see, we have all of these settings in here. I thought we would see, there's Biggening Player. We're going to set the player as the default in our new environment. Now we should be able to delete the System Manager. It is the default profile. I like how it doesn't check that during the delete process. It just fails. It's pretty nice. Let's switch over to the profile so we're not on a profile we're trying to delete. And as you can see, we have our activities, player activities, and bots. So a little bit of redundant information chattering away in the captioning of these different things. So we'll have to think about how we name and label some things. But because we specified the drill down page ID in the activities, the player activities here, because we specified the drill down page ID, boop, we get to our bot count. Now at the moment we have no restrictions around the ability to create new bots, so we could just edit this and create some example ones if we wanted to. Sure. And there's no validation whatsoever on like what kind of power per day or operations per day, so we could go crazy with it. But by creating that, we can now see bot 1. And because we had the refresh on activate, this refreshed immediately as soon as we came out of that data. So that's pretty nice. Great, and now we should be able to delete our system manager because we're not actively using it. Great, perfect. Okay, I've got too many tabs for this small of a resolution, so let's clean that up a little bit. And we can go ahead and copy this because we're going to create a new profile that is system admin. And we are going to point this to our BCS system manager role. I'm alternating between admin and manager by day, so that's not optimal. Let's see, we've called it manager in the object so far, so let's be consistent and call that the profile as well. So that way we are not messing ourselves up later. If you're going to be wrong, be consistently wrong. And then you can fix it. Okay, there we go. So that will add that to our profile list, even if we drop that into a fresh new install. And is required, I believe, for the app source and cloud ecosystem. So refresh to make sure we're all set. Now when we go into my settings, we should have Biggening Player and Biggening System Manager. Perfect. Excellent. Well, that actually nicely worked out to just about an hour. So we now have the ability to store information about our bot instances. We've fixed up some of those system setting pieces, and we've created the beginning of our player role center. So tomorrow we are going to wrap up the week's streams by looking at how we want the bot creation process to work for a player. My thinking on that is that we are probably going to look at our bot list here, and we're going to add some actions, change what's up here. For example, they are not going to be able to just edit it as we did, not to delete the bots. We're going to add some new commands to buy and sell bots, and that, I think, the most logical thing I can think of for that is that we're going to go with a wizard-based approach. So that's going to be new for me. I haven't touched wizards since the classic development environment, probably about 10 years ago. So I'll be doing some reading between now and then, and we'll be thinking about how we're going to validate the buying process. We're going to be looking to things like some of the simpler bots that are going to be some of our simpler templates. We talked about that they are going to be things that players are going to have to purchase based on their revenue. And we also had talked about the possibility that we may have them also cost materials. So we're going to have to think about that a little bit. Yeah, so between now and then, I will also be starting to think about what material types players are going to be buying and selling. Oh, and as a last minute sort of thing, I don't think I actually showed something that it would be useful for us to know and be aware of in the background here. We talked around the setup. I did create a chart of accounts that will be consistent across all of our player companies. As we test it, we may refine this, but a very, very basic US style chart of accounts here where we have some cash, accounts receivable, and we're going to break a few things out into a few different categories, not too many. So like, for example, the value of the bots as fixed assets is going to be in here. We're going to break out sales based on different customer tiers. And then we'll also have some operating expenses so we can see our flow and project if our company is doing well, if it's doing bad. And we'll also be able to really quickly calculate across lots of different entities what's our net wealth situation. So that should do most of what we need. And we do have posting setups for all of that. So for example, we do have some product and customer or business posting groups. And those are pointing to all those relevant accounts. So hopefully this will become a very simple example. We can start to understand how the posting process goes through to create ledger entries. And I think it'll be a real fun way for people to get to see how the system makes data. Because these bots are going to be hammering at it faster than we could hire a lot of people to do. So that's going to be fun. Well, I look forward to seeing folks again tomorrow, and we'll try to keep these to about an hour. That makes it pretty easy to fit into the day, and for the most part, pretty calm to keep on in the background. So, thank you all for joining, and you'll find this up on YouTube probably about an hour from now, and hopefully people enjoy. Take care.